Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
So, our next guest is Dean Webb, who's the executive director of Faith Farm Ministries. And it's always a pleasure to come and be with you, Dean. I don't know what it is. It's your personality. I mean, when you were a little boy, were you like this? You had this great, wonderful personality. You want to help everybody, and you just always have a smile on your face. And I'm sure I'd hate to be with you when you're mad because
I've heard it's not pleasant. You know how demonstrative I am. It works all the way around.
Yeah, but I'm sure that it takes a lot for that to happen. But when you're this whole positive way that you have, is that something you learned?
No, I think it's in the gene pool. My father was, he was a pastor, but he founded 12 churches in 5 states. He had a huge orphanage. He was a large radio broadcaster, and he was one of the original founders of the National Religious Broadcasters, which is still going on today. He was one of their first board members.
And they didn't have Facebook or anything else.
They had nothing like that. No, he most people knew him through the radio. He had a very early morning program at 5:30 or 5:45 in the morning, from 5:45 to 6. And at 6, Patty Page came on. She was there in Tulsa at KVOO FM. And
the real Patty Page?
The real Patty Page, yeah. And so a lot of people would catch him, turn it in early to catch Patty Page's show.
I told you, radio does it. I know. I mean, it's funny. So many people advertise, but when they get on the radio, it's like it's a zinger. Yeah. It just works. Well, the reason I even asked this of you is I know that you've been struggling with something. You were so happy. You were telling me that CBS did this phenomenal... NBC, I'm sorry. NBC did this phenomenal show, and you can talk about that. And then the follow-up, which is very interesting.
Yeah, the nightly news with Lester Holt at 6:30 on NBC. He has an anchor, Kate Snow, who does the anchor for him on Saturdays and Sundays, and sometimes in the morning show, whatever. And she's a backup. So during the addiction process with a lot of stuff about heroin, she did a special program called Hooked, and it was a special segment that they did. In St. Louis, they did took 4 guys that were addicted to heroin, and she did a story on them, and that story was called Hooked, and it won an Emmy. So about a year ago, Lester said, Kate, why don't you do a follow-up and see what's happened to those 4 people? So she did. One was had overdosed and died. One was still hooked on heroin, and the other 2 were brothers, and she followed them up to the mother's apartment, and she showed, especially this one kid, Ryan Otto, one of the brothers, was just, I mean, they re-showed it on NBC. It was really bad. I mean, it was snot coming out of it. I mean, he just looked horrible. But when she called around, she'd ask the moms, she was afraid because she already found one of them was overdosed and died. One of them was still addicted. And so she said, how are your 2 sons doing? She, gingerly asked her, and she said, oh, they're doing great. You're kidding. What did they do? Well, one son was court mandated to a recovery program, and the other son, Ryan came to a place down in Florida, and he graduated after a 9-month program, and he's now going to tech school, going to graduate top of his class. She says, oh, my goodness, where is that place? What's the name of it? And she said, it's Faith Farm Ministries. And so she says, okay, well, I'm going to do a story. So she did a follow-up story that they aired on NBC News about 4 or 5 Monday nights ago. And she came down to the Lauderdale campus because that's where we have an Omega school and Omega work program, 2 buildings on the Fort Lauderdale original campus. And so all 3 campuses feed into the Omega program. If a guy wants to live there, and we provide, clothing and food and shelter, and they have 6 months to get a job and start saving money so they can get an apartment, move out, and make room for somebody else. Then we have Omega School, where we will get guys. We've gotten guys scholarships at the Culinary Arts College in Lauderdale. We've gotten in CDL driving class schools, tech schools. Well, Ryan he's very smart, got into a tech school for engineering, computer engineering, IT work. And he was going to graduate at the top of his class. So Kate arranged to come down and show him on the Fort Lauderdale campus of Faith Farm and got permission to go to his school and just show him wiring computers and stuff in his class. So the neat thing about it was we were standing there. Kate was talking. I was to her left, and then her cameraman was to his left, and then the boom mic guy, and then Richard, my director, and we were waiting for Ryan to show up. So all of a sudden, this kid walks up, and she's talking. She looks up at him and says, "Oh, hi," and keeps talking. And Richard goes, "Kate, that's Ryan." And she looked at him and choked up because she didn't even recognize him. His countenance has changed so much from when she did that video of him 2.5 years ago. She didn't even recognize him. And so she just grabbed him, hugged him, and said, "I didn't even recognize you, Otto." So anyway, they did about just a short 2.5-minute story on his recovery and at Faith Farm. But what that did is, it was so sad, Anita. We started getting emails and calls from people around the country going, "Oh, I got a 51-year-old son that's addicted, and I want to get him clean before he dies." Somebody else says, "I've got a 21-year-old daughter. I've got a 32-year-old son, and I know they're going to just kill themselves. They won't change." And the sad thing about it, it's very tough for me. My heart just goes out to them because it's real hard to tell them and say, every family member is grieving their family members that's addicted with drugs or alcohol. They just, they're probably stealing from them to get drug money or a fix. They're just going through hell. Plus it's their flesh and blood. They can't stand to see what they're doing to themselves. But the sad thing is, for somebody to change, that person themselves have to want to change. They just have to want to change. And what gets them to that point? Usually is when they hit bottom. And when they really get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And just say, "Okay, I got to do something."
And we've talked about this before, and it's very easy for people to say, "Look, you have to kick him out. You have to just let him go." And we know what people say, because sometimes you do that, but then if they should just go out and they wind up in the gutter and then they die, it's tremendous guilt, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's James Dobson with Focus on the Family wrote a book called Tough Love, and it was how you have to, sometimes you just have to say no. Like a little kid's crying, "I want a glass of water, Daddy," and you get up and get it to them, and they do that about 5 times in a row, and you realize they're playing you, and then the tough love says, "No, son, you got to go to sleep. That's enough. Daddy can't come up and give you water anymore, can't get out of bed anymore." And he starts with that and then goes through the teenage and older years on giving tough love to people. And it's really a tough tightrope to walk because your emotions are so tight. I mean, this is your flesh and blood, your son or daughter that you're seeing, and you're seeing them, watching them destroy themselves. And it's really, really tough.
Now, you did something. You've told us so many times that sometimes these people are threatened with jail. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty strong motivation, isn't it?
Yeah.
But now, what happened to the young man who was on NBC? What made him change?
I think it was when she was doing the camera work. She says, "You've been doing heroin." Now he's sitting on the couch there with the mother sitting there, and she'd just gone through, seen the mother earlier, and said that Ryan was out, so she was waiting for him to come back to the apartment. And she'd gone through and shown all the drugs she did, kept all lined up in case one of them overdosed. She'd run into the bedroom and I forgot the name of the drug, but it's one of the fire police people and the emergency people use that'll revive a heroin person that overdoses. And she showed Kate how she had all this lined up, and she said, "I'm just afraid they're going to die." Well, when they came in and did that footage, I just can't tell you how decrepit this guy looked. Horrible. I mean, his eyes were weeping, and his glasses were down on his nose, and he looked really out of it. And she says, "You've been doing heroin, haven't you?" And he says, "No, I've been out drinking." And she says, "Really?" And he says, "Well, I think I did a Xanax too." And the voice overlay on the program says, his mother really knew the truth. And so she said, "Are you afraid for him right now?" She said, "Oh, yeah, I'm really afraid for him, that he's going to die. So something about that little process triggered him to realize he needed to make a change, because she told him that, she said, the other 2 people I was going to interview are dead or are still in overdose, and you're alive. And so anyway, I don't know how he found us. I know they found us on the internet. Most people find we hit a big deal this last month because we had one state out of 50 that we'd never had anybody, and it was South Dakota. Well, we got a girl and a guy from South Dakota.
Did you really?
So we now have covered all 50 states in the last 5 years, plus 8 foreign countries. So we just had a guy Sunday at Lauderdale graduate came down from Canada. So anyway, he checked himself in. He went through the Boynton Beach campus, and then because of Omega, he wanted to go to school.
But wait, first he has to get off drugs, and how does he do that?
Yeah, to come in, he's got to detox somewhere. Somehow he's got to get off. of. No, we can't take somebody who's inebriated or still under the influence of drugs.
And how long does that take usually?
It can take anywhere from 2 days to a week to 10 days, depending on how bad they are.
So he first had to make that commitment to go and do that.
And detox, and that's really tough. And I don't know. I don't happen to know enough of his history to know if he came down and did that here or did it home and then traveled here. I suspect that's what he did. But he passed the interview and did the online application at Faith Farm and came down to the Boynton campus and came through. And then we tell them about their opportunities. If they need a high school diploma, they work on their GED. We're the only recovery approved for college credit. They can sit for college credit on the courses that they're forced to take anyway. Some of them just don't elect to sit for the exams, but he did. And so he wanted to go on to school. That kind of primed the pump a little bit. So he went to Omega down at Lauderdale and got in IT school. We have no guarantees. I just spoke I got up at 5 o'clock yesterday morning, went to Lauderdale to speak to the incoming Class 1. I do that at all 3 farms. And I just told them, I said, my goal is to do everything I can in my power to remove any excuse you have for not being successful. I'm going to try if you don't have a high school diploma, you're going to work on your GED. If you ever think that you might be college material, you're going to sit for the exams. If you don't know how God wired you, you don't know what your likes and dislikes. When you get to Class 6, the final class where you work on your resume, you're going to ask for a career direct. A career direct is a test I helped develop at another nonprofit years ago. Spent almost $1 million and had it psychometric back tested with the University of Georgia. And it has everything that the Myers-Briggs, the DISC test, all those tests has everything but it also has a spiritual element. That's why it won't be popular but it's got a spiritual element. So you can tell if somebody has a heart for God. Somebody might eventually be a pastor, a missionary, something. So we ask them then to take that because if they went online, it would cost them $125 to take it. With us, we give it to them free because I buy them in bulk because I developed. I set up a bulk 500 disc system that you could buy for institutions. But anyway, they take that and it'll show them everything. It'll show them their strengths, their weaknesses. It'll even show them their misguided strengths or their misunderstood strengths. Like for example, my one of my strengths, one of my heart is giving financially to people. And but when I took that test, I realized the most common misunderstanding about me is Webb. All he thinks about is money. Well, I think about it in the scriptural context of the ebb and flow of give and it'll be given unto you. And then so you can give again and then you'll be, the scriptural teaching of sowing and reaping. And so that's my most interested because I think about it. How do I get money so I can give it?
Right.
And
that's great.
So that's what's misunderstood. People misunderstand that. But anyway, it'll show you what your strengths are that people misunderstand about you because they're not used to that strength. So that can give them guidance on getting a job. Some of them, it's the first time they've ever taken an assessment. I mean, these guys are coming off the street. They don't know anything, some of them. And not all. Some are really, really smart. But we just do everything, ANITA, we possibly can to put these people back on their feet again.
I know you do. And I'm talking to the master of it all, and I have to tell you, such a privilege to know Dean Webb, who's executive director of Faith Farm Ministries. It's such a big organization with such a big heart and big mind. It really does what it says it's going to do. I've attended so many of their graduations, and they're so heartwarming. And I have the book that he wrote called "You Turn to God: Wrong Ways Made Right." It's 50 of the graduates, sorted graduates, women, men, and what it was like before and what it's like now. It's great. Of course, I love going to graduations because they're very compelling to see people stand up and in front of everyone tell people what it was like before and now how it is. It's pretty spiritual. Your spirit just soars.
It's amazing. At the Boynton graduation last Sunday, my heart goes out there because we had both men and women graduate, and we had one of the two women and one of the 9 men describe growing up how they were sexually abused. Now, they didn't describe how, but you know what I mean.
They said that.
They bared their soul and told
Were
that.
their parents there, by the way?
I think the girls was, but the guys wasn't.
Okay.
But tell how they, and if their family member that did that, they're not going to do that, of course.
Of course not.
But sometimes we urge them. We say it's very cathartic to expose yourself and be totally blatantly honest because you're a changed person.
And this helps other people sitting in the audience who maybe has the same problem, right?
Yeah, same problem. Or wow, I can't believe they can tell about their sexual abuse and that got them into drugs and stuff.
Right.
I have the same thing. Or else they'll be thinking, wow, if they can make this graduate, I don't have as many problems as they do.
Right.
I don't have it as bad off. So it's just amazing to have them expose what their life was that got them into the addictive process of drugs and alcohol, and how their lives have been transformed both spiritually and physically and mentally at Faith Farm. It's just transformational.
And I know that you're not a psychologist, even though you've been around so much of this, but so being sexually abused or being abused in other ways, it does cause people to get into alcohol and drugs?
Oh, yeah, it's horrible. I always said it's a good thing. I tell my staff, it's a good thing I'm not God. Because if somebody sexually abused a child, I'd just take them out. They'd be out of the gene pool instantly.
Right.
I've seen it warps their mind. Quite often, I've seen women, and it's true of men too, but if they've been sexually abused, it so scars them emotionally and mentally, they'll repeat that mistake on somebody else. They'll become an abuser, a sexual abuser.
I see.
And I've seen it going through generation after generation, and it's hard to break that. The only way you can do it, I think, is with God's help. You have to actually genuinely get spiritually right enough to the point where you can genuinely forgive that
them.
person.
I knew you were going to say
if
that.
you can forgive that person and see that hold that they have over you, they did that once or twice or a dozen times. Doesn't matter. The point is, you're the one that's been bearing that all the time, and you're the one that got addiction to try and push that down out of your memory, and you're the one that it's hurting. It's not hurting them. They're fat, dumb, and happy. They don't even know. They did their dastardly deed, and they're gone on with their life. But you're the one that's bearing all the pain and suffering of that and trying to medicate on to forget that and push that down in your subconscious about, because it's very traumatic to be sexually abused. Very. And some people, for some very soft-spoken women, it's almost as traumatic to be verbally abused. I mean, it's hard to recover from abuse, especially as a child. And it's really sad when that happens. And sometimes it can be as small as a divorce. We had 2 people that testified, gave their speech, and how they went off the rail when they felt that somehow they might have been the fault of their parents splitting up somehow and divorce, and then the agony of having to choose which one they were going to live with. Or maybe one parent wanted them and the other one didn't want them, and they felt unloved because the one didn't want them. And sometimes just a simple thing like, I say simple, but divorce can send somebody off the rail.
Okay, so let's move now back to the young people, the men, who aren't able to get off drugs. So let's say they have to track back to what it was that started them, right?
Right. Yeah.
So now, is this done by psychologists, or how do you even do that?
What we do it now, again, we're a faith-based organization, so all of our stuff is based. There's a lot of stuff in the Old and New Testament of scriptures about things that have happened to other people that you can tell stories about and read stories about, and draw the correlation in the relationship. And so basically, it's getting them to acknowledge that they need God in their life. And they can keep trying to do their own thing, but at some point there's a higher power they need to submit to that's going to in control of everything, and seek that wisdom and guidance to for their life. And they're given practical information about causes of addiction. We've got books and courses on here are things that can happen to cause you to addiction. We have a thing called the bottle family. Now, this is really funny, but it's a bunch of different shaped bottles, and they're dressed up. One's the father, one's the mother, then different kids. And they go through, okay, now here's the dad. And then they describe the dysfunction of the father. Okay, now here's the mother. She's, and they describe a mother who will allow you to continue because she doesn't want to confront you. And all the brothers and sisters. And so then they will discuss that. They will discuss that because they can see them all dressed in beautiful tux and everything, these bottles, different size bottles. There's the bottle family. And they will go through and talk about the dysfunction in their family. And some can usually pick out one or more things, dysfunction in their family to relate to, and realize how that influenced and caused them to act out the way they're acting. And then we have a program called Houses. In Houses, this is way after they've been in a class together in the foxhole together for at least four classes of 6 weeks each. They will go on the board and they'll just draw a house, and they'll put stick figures, and they'll draw a little frame house on the blackboard for every place they've lived, and they'll put a stick figure who lived in that house and everything, and then they'll start describing it. Well, that's a healing process because they start to visually see, like Troy Hardy, the director of Boynton campus, when he got to his 4th house that he'd lived in, he broke down and cried because he looked at the stick figures and realized there was not a father in any one of those houses. The mother, he was one of 7 children, and the mother had 7 children with 7 different men. And he realized that the thing missing out of his life was a father. So when we told him that God loved him and was his father, Heavenly Father.
Oh, boy, I can see that. Now he has a father.
It was just, and that
Amazing.
He would never leave him or forsake him. He would always love him. It was like an epiphany. It was just okay,
beautiful.
I get it. So
that probably is very true in a lot of the cases that when the split families and people miss probably the fathers more than the mothers. Usually mothers stay.
Yeah, Scripture says the glory of children are their fathers. And so when the father's messed up or missing or something, it affects people. It really does. Different ways, different levels. But we have really practical things we do to pull out from them their causes of their addiction.
This is amazing. Now, this would be the right thing to do, though, before they get to you, so that they'll do it to come to you. That's what you.
The problem is they got to be motivated to come to us to sit through all this stuff.
I understand that, but you said the reason they get motivated is because you're helping them through this. So here are these people with all this misery, and what is it that's going to get them other than being incarcerated to come and say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore, and I'm going to give myself a chance. No one knows that, do they? Because the parents of all these people.
And the sad thing is you have to be genuinely motivated to make a change in your life to stick it through our 9-month program, because our program is pretty intense. I mean, between the educational stuff and the teaching and the spiritual stuff and the work projects and working on GEDs, I mean, it's a pretty strong program. And you've got to be motivated to stick it through that, because you work 6 days a week. Sunday you got off, but 6 days a week you work, and so does our staff. But that's an intense program, so you don't ever make that commitment unless you really kind of hit bottom. Or like you say, a judge. We have 17 judges that sentence people to Faith Farm. So between Broward County and Palm Beach County. So those are our most motivated people, because a lot of times the judges who know about us know the life change that occurs at Faith Farm, and that it's usually a permanent change in their life. Every now and then, like we had a guy Sunday who came back. He didn't follow our instructions. He graduated several years ago and went out, and he didn't stay in church. He didn't stay with other people like-minded or stay in Scripture or prayer or whatever. And he started running with the old crowd. And, man, before he knew it, he was addicted again and came back a second time. Well, often people who do it the second time, actually, they don't have to graduate. Sometimes people will walk off after 4 months and say, oh, I've had enough. I'm not going to stick around 9 months. That's called the pink cloud, by the way. That's a medical term. The medical term called the pink cloud is after you've been 12 weeks or more off of drugs and alcohol, and you've had a regimen. You go to bed at a certain time, get up at a certain time, have 3 meals a day. You have work project, you have mental stimulation, classwork, spiritual input, whatever. Your body and mind start telling you, God, I feel better than I've felt in years, which is a true statement. That's what's so deceiving. That's a true statement. And that's when we have our walk-offs. We had a guy at Boynton walked off in class 4, and 2 days later we got a call to come identify a body behind a dumpster at Walgreens, and it was this kid that had walked off and overdosed.
No.
So it's no guarantee. The pink. I warn every time I speak them. I said, okay, I'm going to tell you about the pink cloud, because every single person, man and woman, under the sound of my voice is going. I promise you, you will experience it. And the problem is, it feels so real because it's true. But the problem is, you need at least 6 months off for those left and right nerves between your left and right lobes in your brain to start coming together, and those nerve synapses start reconnecting. And when you do that, we put you into half-a-day class. That's when you're most spiritually and mentally acute to learn what we need to teach you about recovery.
Whoa, isn't this great? So remember the names Dean Webb, and remember the name Faith Farm Ministries. Remember the website, which is faithfarm.org, faithfarm.org. And we certainly love that you come here. It's never enough for us, but congratulations on all the good stuff you do, Dean.
Thank you. I love it that you allow me to talk about Faith Farm.
Oh, please. That's my greatest joy. I was just talking about this morning. I was at another appointment, so you never know. Thank you.
Thank you very much.